Well, we're taking a short break from Genesis, and instead we're going to look at this well-known parable from Matthew's Gospel, the parable of the talents. This parable is found towards the end of Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 25. So this story is one Jesus tells at the very end of his ministry. In a couple of weeks' time, he's going to go to the cross. What else has Jesus been teaching his followers in this period? What's the context of this parable? We'll skip back to chapter 24 and we'll see. Verse 3, we find out he's outside Jerusalem on the Mount of Olives and he's teaching his disciples. What's he speaking about? Well, look at the headings in the ESV. First one is signs of the close of the age. The abomination of desolation. So that's talking about the destruction of the temple in AD 70. One of the headings is the coming of the Son of Man. So Jesus is talking about the coming judgment. His death, his resurrection, and then eventually his reign. The key verses in chapter 24, as far as these parables are concerned, are verses 9 through to 14. So 24 verse 9 says this. Jesus is speaking. He says, then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And the gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Jesus is telling us about the need for his disciples to persevere until the end. He says many of my so-called followers are going to jack it in. Some are going to grow cold. Some are going to go rogue. They're going to betray you. They will not stick it out. They're going to look like Christians. They'll be in the church, but they won't be faithful. That is the context for the parables that follow. So you've got the parable of the 10 virgins at the start of chapter 25, and the parable of the talents. And they reveal that within the church, within every church, there are true believers, real servants mixed in with unbelieving bad servants. You've got the parable of the 10 virgins in verses 1 to 13. And that parable is all about being vigilant, watching for Jesus' return. So verse 13, watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour. And then immediately following that story, Jesus tells his disciples the parable of the talents. If the 10 virgins is about vigilance, the parable of the talents is about diligence. The virgins teach us how to watch. The talents teach us how to work. So what we're going to do tonight is go through the parable, and then we've got 4 lessons to learn. First up then, the parable. Verse 14. So imagine we're on the Mount of Olives. We're with Jesus. It's a warm spring evening. The sun is setting. Maybe we're nibbling on some olives, right? And we're listening to what Jesus has got to say. What does he tell us? Verse 14. For it will be like a man going on a journey. It will be like a man going on a journey. What is the it? Well, look back at verse 1. Jesus tells us the kingdom of heaven will be like. So the kingdom of heaven will be like a man going on the journey. What's the kingdom of heaven? Well, it's the idea of that hidden kingdom, that realm we cannot see, the realm which will one day be revealed when Jesus returns, the way that realm interacts with our own. That's the kingdom of heaven. What's it like? Well, here's what it's like. It's like a very rich man, probably a king, going on a long journey. This man has servants. And we know the story, don't we? He gives 3 of his servants vast sums of money. So verse 15, to one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1. 2 each according to his ability. Then he went away. This man is the Elon Musk of the ancient world. He leaves his possessions, his estate, in the hands of his servants. And he leaves them an awful lot of money. So 1 talent of silver in the ancient world was worth the equivalent of 16 years' pay. To earn just one talent, you'd have to work for 6,000 days. So this man is rich. He's able to just dish out talents like they're nothing. He's also trusting, isn't he? He believes that his men will carry on business in his absence. He gives one of them 5 talents. That's 80 years worth of pay. The second guy gets 2 talents. That's 32 years worth of pay. The third gets 1 talent, 16 years worth of pay. But it's understood by each of them that they're not simply to use this money for themselves. They're to get busy for their master. Verse 16, he who had received the 5 talents went at once and traded with them. And he made 5 talents more. So also he who had the 2 talents made 2 talents more. So the first 2 servants, they get it, don't they? And immediately they are off. Perhaps they buy property and rent it out and get an income from it. Maybe they buy cattle and breed the cattle and resell new calves or whatever. Maybe they sell the wool, they sell the milk. Perhaps they invest in vineyards or they invest in building schemes. We're not told, but whatever they do, they're not doing it to make profit for themselves. These first 2 servants have just got one thing in mind. They know the master will return, and he's going to want to see what progress they have made. They're going to have to give an account of themselves to him. Verse 18, he who had received the 1 talent went and dug in the ground and hid his master's money. The third servant is markedly different, isn't he? He's been given an unbelievable opportunity. 6,000 days' pay all at once. How exciting. Most people in the first century, they were day labourers. So they didn't know where the next meal was coming from. They'd go into town, hopefully get a job for that day to pay the bills. But this rich man has made sure that at the very least, his third servant won't have to break his back earning a pittance. No, you're going to be an administrator. You're going to be an owner of various businesses. You'll be ordering other people around. Your basic needs will be met. So you can use that freedom to serve and benefit your master. But the third servant doesn't do that, does he? He treats this money, he treats this blessing with contempt. And he buries it in the ground like a squirrel with a nut. What is he saying by burying it in the ground? What's the picture? Well, it's an image of death, isn't it? As if to say, my master's dead to me. It's an image of status. So my master's below me. It's an image of shame. I don't want to be seen working for that guy. I'm going to hide this gift away. And it's an act of humiliation. I'm going to drag his name through the muds. It's an act of disbelief because I don't really think he's going to return. In fact, maybe I hope he doesn't return because I can then dig up this treasure in the future and pretend it's mine. If it's out of sight, people will forget he ever gave it to me. Well, are the third servant's dreams fulfilled? Well, no. Look at verse 19. Now, after a long time, the master of those servants came and settled accounts with them. You can imagine he sends out a summons, and the third servant gets the shock of his life. Like, I don't know if you're ever called into your headmaster's office when you're at school. Well, your legs turn to J, don't you? Your heart's pumping. Oh, you're going to get in trouble. You're going to have to come face to face with the authority. Verse 20, he who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 talents more, saying, Master, you've delivered to me 5 talents. Here, I've made 5 talents more. His master said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master. Now let's break this down. First of all, notice just how well off the master is. He says 5 talents, 80 years worth of pay, is very little to him. It's nothing to him. It's like a couple of quid or a pound. But he tells his servant, you were faithful with it, so now I'm going to give you even more. And then he says, enter into the joy of your master. You worked hard for a long time, but now your labours are over. You were in the servants' quarters, but now you're coming into the family home. And in the palace, in the family home, there's joy, there's gladness, there's happiness. You get to come in and enjoy all of the master's riches. In essence, I think very subtly, the servant has been transformed. He's now going to be honoured like a family member, like a son. His status has changed. In fact, he's not called a servant after this point. Verse 22 and 23, exactly the same thing happens with the second servant. He was given 2 talents. He makes 2 talents. He's invited into the party, into the family home. Which brings us to the third servant. Verse 24. He also, who had received the 1 talent, came forward saying, Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and I hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. Now here's something to ponder. Is anything the third servant says true? Are his accusations against his master true? What does he say? Well, first he says, I knew you were a hard man. Well, hang on a minute. He's just said to your 2 colleagues, well done, boys. Come into my house, you're promoted. Come and live with me, enjoy my riches. An investment banker in the city doesn't invite the office cleaner home to have dinner with him, does he? But this man does. He's not a hard man, he's generous, he's fair. Next, his servant accuses him of reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. Is that true? Well, I wonder if you've ever watched The Apprentice. There's Alan Sugar. And you'll know if you watch The Apprentice, the contestants are given tasks. And Alan Sugar will say, like, I want you to invent a new lunchbox. A lunchbox fit for the 21st century. And you've got to create an app for it. And I want you to promote it at this business fair. And you're going to make a TV advert as well. And you've got 1 day. And of course, what happens? Well, every episode, it's a disaster zone. Both teams mess it up. Because they don't have time and they don't have the resources. Could you accuse the rich man of those tactics? What has he given the third servant? Well, he's given him 16 years' worth of pay. That's about £500,000 in today's money. That's not reaping where you haven't sown, is it? That's a massive investment. If someone gave you £500,000 and said, look, start a business, make some profit, I'm sure that even the least entrepreneurial of us could pull it off. And unlike The Apprentice, the master gives the servant plenty of time. He is gone for years. He says he's gone a very long time. Long enough for those investments and plans to bear fruit. What the master asks of his servant is perfectly reasonable. Thirdly, the servant tells his master that the reason he hid the money was because he was afraid. Is that true? Well, it can't be, can it? If you were really, really afraid, you would have done something. Even something small. In fact, that's what the master says, verse 27. You ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest. If you couldn't be bothered to work for it, well, at least give it to the bank. They'll find someone who will. But he wouldn't even do that. Everything the third servant claims is untrue. He's either lying or he simply doesn't know who his master is. Verse 26, we get the master's analysis of the character of his servant. He simply tells him, you're wicked and you're lazy. You had this massive blessing, this huge opportunity, and you squandered it. 28, verse 28, take the talent from him and give it to him who has the 10 talents. Where's the best place for the master to put his riches? Well, he'll give it to the faithful servant, the one who took the most responsibility, the one who worked the hardest. I'll give it to him. Verse 29, for to everyone who has will more be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. And what is the fate of this lazy servant? We'll look at verse 30. Cast the worthless servant into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. In the movie Home Alone, don't know if you've seen it, the main character, Kevin McAllister, he's been left behind by his family. They've gone to Paris, they accidentally leave him. And he's home alone, and it's Christmas time. And he ventures out, and at one point he's walking through the neighbourhood, and he sees another family having Christmas dinner. And they're laughing, and they're enjoying each other's company, and they're opening presents, and they're joking. And he's outside in the dark, in the cold, all alone. And they're celebrating it. And it's then he realises just how much his family mean to him and what he's missing out on. And that's where the third servant finds himself. His two colleagues go into the palace where they'll live in splendour and luxury while he remains out in the dark, only able to look on from a distance. He can see the celebration, he can see the wine and the champagne and the cake, but he's never going to be able to taste it. And the servant in that space will begin to weep and grind his teeth together. He'll be so cross with himself because what he was asked to do wasn't that tough, was it? The master was kind and generous, but he completely misjudged the situation. Okay, that's the parable. 4 lessons, and we're going to use 4 imperatives. I'm going to tell you how you ought to be in light of this parable. Point number 1, be aware. Be aware that Jesus is coming back. In this parable, the rich man goes on some sort of journey, doesn't he? And what does he do? He places his authority on his servants. The rich man gives his servants responsibility for his whole estate. And that's what Jesus has given to us. So what does he say at the end of this very gospel? Jesus dies, he rises from the dead, he's going to ascend into heaven and take his rightful place on the throne of the universe. And listen to what he tells his disciples. Chapter 28, verse 18. He says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. You go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I've commanded you. And behold, I am with you always to the end of the age. Jesus says, I'm going, but I give you Christians, I give you my disciples, my authority. I give you control and responsibility for my kingdom here on earth. I'll always be with you in spirit. Till when? Till the end of the age. And when will the age end? Well, it will end when the King returns. Christian friend, are you aware of that? Do you still believe that? Do you realise that being a Christian comes with great responsibility? Jesus has made you and I the guardians and gatekeepers of his kingdom. We're all that separates the kingdom of darkness from engulfing the world. We've got a big responsibility. So we need to be ready and aware of what this world really is. It's temporary, it's fading, it's dying, but the King is coming to rescue it. But maybe there's a little bit of the third servant in you. Maybe you've been saying, well, look, people have been saying this for centuries. Jesus is coming back. He's going to come through the clouds. There's going to be angels. Maybe it's all just figurative. Maybe he won't return. Maybe I can just live my Christian life as if I'm never going to see Jesus again. Christian friend, you can't. The master will return. Be aware the king is coming back. Second point, knowing that the master of their house will return, the second command is to be busy. Be busy working for Jesus. Now, why does each servant get a different amount of money to work with? Well, Jesus tells us each was given an amount according to his ability. So as Jesus looks at his servants, as he looks at his church, he sees different qualities in them. He sees that some people are wired differently to others. In an orchestra, the low notes are just as important as the high notes, aren't they? The harpist is of equal value to the pianist. But what they produce differs in volume and quantity. The fiddler, the violinist, is going to have to do a lot more work than the percussionist. But altogether, the whole thing creates a beautiful tune, doesn't it? Well, it's the same in the kingdom of God's. We all make up the body, the fabric of God's holy temple. But we're not all called to have the upfront jobs, are we? A lot of people who don't understand church, they think that my job is the most important in the church. My position, my role as pastor and preacher. They say, well, that's what I'd want if I was involved. They think it's the most important, but it's not, is it? In fact, you guys survived 11 years without a pastor, so it's an important role, but it's not vital. What keeps the church going? What keeps the lights on? Well, it's the faithful service of those who do what others think are the small, mundane jobs. So those of you who are just consistent in your attendance, I can rely on you. I know you're going to be there, and I'm encouraged by it. Those of you who show great attention to detail when it comes to the church building or church planning. You care about the little things. Those who serve on the door, those who do refreshments. Those who ring up their Christian brothers and sisters. Those of you who pray in your own time and in your own home for the church. What I'm saying is God doesn't expect all of us to be great street evangelists or Sunday school teachers or pastors. We're not all wired for that, are we? We're not all able to do that. But what Jesus does expect is for us to be busy with what he has given us. So let's say, here's a lady called Ethel, right? She's a little bit OCD. She loves everything to be neat and tidy and clean. In fact, she gets a little bit wound up when she gets to church and she finds a mess. That's the way God's wired her. That's the way God's designed her. So Jesus says, all right, Ethel, you're going to be the one to clean the church. Don't bring me problems. Bring me solutions. You're the solution. Here's Clive, all right? He can't work a computer. He's disorganised. He's messy. But God has made him as strong as an ox physically. So Jesus says, all right, mate, you're the one who's going to put the chairs away. When anything needs lifting, it's going to be Clive we call. He's not blessed with brains, but he is blessed with brawn. Here's Trevor. Trevor works really, really hard somewhere. He's time poor. He sometimes logs onto Zoom on a Wednesday on the train when he's on his way home. He's time poor, but actually his job pays very, very well. So he's cash rich. So Jesus says, okay, Trevor, you better make sure that your church is supported financially. If that's all you can offer, then Jesus expects you to offer it. Do you see the point, Christian friend? Each one of us is in a different situation. We're at different stages of life, with different gifts, different blessings, different talents that God has given us. If you've got kids, you'll know you'll be energy poor, you'll be financially poor, and you'll be time poor. Well, Jesus expects less from you than the person sitting next to you. But here's the crucial part. Whether you've been blessed with lots or little, Jesus demands something. some fruit, some holiness, some service for his kingdom. He didn't save you. He didn't die on a cross and shed his blood and die in your place so that we could be wicked and lazy. That's how he describes the last servant. Imagine being told by Jesus on the day of judgment, well, look, I died for you and you just remained wicked. You carried on sinning like it didn't matter. You made no effort to be holy. Every temptation, every trial, you failed it. And you were lazy. You sat on your sofa eating Pringles and watching Netflix when you could have been at church learning and having fellowship. You could have been serving me, but instead you served yourself. Christian friend, are you busy for the Lord's? Are you using what he's given you to serve him? Third lesson, be busy, because here's the contrast to what has just been said. Be busy because we will be rewarded. Now, I think that amongst Protestant evangelical Christians, this is one of the least understood and least taught doctrines in the Bible. And it's the doctrine that what we do with our lives, the actions and decisions we make in this life, they matter in eternity. We had a visitor to the church once, a Christian man, and when he heard me say this, he was taken aback. He said, oh, I've never heard that before. I'm going to have to go and check with my pastor to see what he thinks. Why is there ignorance and misunderstanding about what Jesus is teaching here? Well, I think it's because when Calvinists like us hear this, it almost sounds like we're abandoning the doctrine of justification by faith, doesn't it? Justification by faith is the idea that we're saved because it's all through faith in Jesus, not by work we can do. But actually, that idea that it contradicts it is nonsense. The two teachings are not mutually exclusive. Both things can be true. So we believe that it's only through faith in Jesus Christ, his death, his resurrection, his ascension, it's only faith in his power and love that saves a person. Our faith is in him to wash us. Nothing we can do can ever do enough or even begin to wash away our sin. It's impossible. It would be like trying to clean your smelly duvet cover with an oil-soaked rag. No, we require Jesus completely and utterly to clean us and forgive us. That's how we gain our place in the kingdom. We are adopted, invited, brought into his kingdom, his household, because he has selected us and saved us. But being in the privileged position of being his children, his servants, means that we get a double blessing, if you like. We're saved, but not just that. In the afterlife, we're told we're rewarded for what we do now. In other words, Jesus is so gracious that he promises to greatly reward those he's chosen to save, even when our efforts seem futile and small. So think about a parent with a little toddler. Their 3 or 4 year old paints them a picture and say, look, mummy, it's a cat. But the picture's rubbish. Don't look like a cat. It's a load of blue blobs, a load of fingerprints all over it. It ain't going to win the Turner Prize. It'll be in the bin by the end of the week. But a mother doesn't say that, does she? She's delighted. She says, this is amazing, darling. She hugs her child, she kisses her, she sticks it on the fridge. And when dad shows up, he makes a big fuss too. He's thrown up in the air. Aren't you great? You're going to be an artist. Over this rubbish little picture. Because it's not the quality of the work, it's the love and effort that's gone into it that counts. It's the relationship that gives that work value. That's what's going on here. That's what will happen in the new heaven and the new earth. You will be greatly rewarded for the sacrifices and the service you've given to the Lord Jesus Christ. And that's really important, isn't it? When you're involved in the unglamorous workings of the church, when you're unblocking the toilet, or changing the bins, or you're leaving home 40 minutes earlier to pick someone up. The Lord is no man's debtor. And remember Romans 6 verse 2, he simply says, he will reward each of us according to our works. What we do here on earth has a direct effect on our roles and responsibilities in heaven. The harder we work for him here, the more responsibility he will give us there. What will that look like, you might ask? Well, I've no idea. But the first and second servant are invited into the palace and given command over even more. Paul tells us we will judge the angels. We'll tell angels what to do and where to go. We will have authority over them. The harder you work for Jesus here, the more responsibility you'll be given there. So, Christian friend, practice here in this life what you're going to spend eternity doing. Be busy because you will be rewarded. Final point is a short one. Be warned. Not everyone who looks like a Christian, and sounds like a Christian, and dresses like a Christian is a Christian. I'll be honest with you, sometimes I look out on a Sunday morning when I'm preaching and I wonder how many people in the congregation are actually saved. How many of them am I going to be able to hug and have fellowship with when we're in heaven? That's Jesus' big point to his disciples in this section of Matthew. Remember, as we join him in this scene, huddled together on the Mount of Olives, listening to his parable, who else is listening? Who's in the little crew? Well, there's a man called Judas there, isn't it? Judas Iscariot, a man who in a few days' time is going to betray his friends. He's going to bury his opportunity in the dirt. And as a result, Judas is going to be thrown into hell, thrown to the outer darkness. So as we close, let me challenge you again. Are you really serving your King? Do you really believe that he will return? Do you understand that heaven is a very real place? It's more real than where we are now. And it's more important than where we are now. You're going to spend thousands, hundreds, millions of years living in the new heaven, the new earth. Compared to just 70, 80, 90 years if God spares you. This life is a flash in the pan. It's one single frame in a film that will last forever and ever. So then why are we living as if this place is all there is? If you believe that heaven's real, well then also be warned, because hell is real. Those who reject Jesus the King will themselves be rejected by the King. Those who bury the opportunity Jesus has presented to them, those who remain in their wickedness and their selfishness, well, Jesus says you don't get a place at the party. You will remain outside in the darkness with the door firmly slammed in your face. And you'll weep and you'll grind your teeth together, kicking yourself for all eternity. Because what you were asked to do, what Jesus asked you to do, ain't that tough. Your master is nothing but kind. So be warned. Put your faith in Jesus, have your sins forgiven, and do it tonight.